So hi everyone, my name is Fawkes. I am the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Fellow for the City of Iowa City and the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. I came here with Brenda Nations, the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Iowa City, aka my boss. Yeah. And so I guess I should say that I'm also a first year Master of Public Health student. It's not been that long. It's been, 2 days? Dr. Story here is my advisor. It's been 2 days, so I need to get into the habit of saying that when I introduce myself. So that's a little bit about me. And I did prepare a bit of a presentation, but since we don't have a screen or projector or anything, I'm just gonna talk through it, and then in the moments when I need to show something, I'll just turn it around and show it. And then the last thing I wanna say before I begin is, if you have questions, just save them for the end. And so yes, let's begin. So my project is titled Addressing Climate Change, Health, and Equity in Iowa City. That may change once we, finalize the report, but that's what it is right now, for now, tentatively. And as I mentioned, I'm working with the City of Iowa City, USDN, and a bit about USDN is that it is the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, and there's no local, or I would say, they don't have a central office. So what it is a network of city professionals across different cities that are working in sustainability, government, environmental sciences, social justice, etc. And they have come together to create sort of a peer-to-peer network. And my position as one of the fellows, I'm one of 6 or 7? Is it 7?
7, I think.
7 fellows across the U.S. And some of the cities that they've been working on climate resiliency and social justice and environmental things. Some of those cities would be like the city of Colorado, the city of Fort Collins in Colorado, the city of Baltimore, Iowa City, Dubuque, Iowa is doing one, and a few others. So that's just a little bit of background about USDN, my position, and why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I want to talk a little bit about the Iowa City Climate Action Plan. When I visited Brenda's office in May, whenever that time was, I had no idea about climate change. I mean, I knew the basics that, the earth was warming up and greenhouse gases and some of more the public health related effects just because I'm public health, but this was really something that I was going into with an open mind, and I was just really willing to learn more about climate change, which Brenda helped me to do. And I feel like at the end of I've been in this position for about 12 weeks now, and toward the end I feel like I know more about climate change than I ever thought I needed to know. So the Iowa City and Brenda, I guess, because she's the sustainability coordinator, put out a climate action plan in 2018, last year in the fall. And the original goal of the climate action plan was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Iowa City to what I know the new goal, the original goal was 30%?
26 to 28%.
Okay, 26 to 28% by 2040, and then
2030,
and then 0 or
80% by 2050.
Yes, 80% by 2050. Now it has changed. I think it's been a week. So the new goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 45% by 2040 and net zero by 2050. And I do want to define greenhouse gases a little bit. So the greenhouse gas effect is just the idea that there are certain gases that are we are producing, and we're able to receive light, but the heat is being trapped inside, and so that is global warming, as you would say. So for the purpose of my project, we are talking about climate change though, because climate change considers the effects of global warming and not just the warming itself. And so going back to the Iowa City Climate Action Plan, there was 35 actions, and they were categorized under 5 different areas, sort of the management of buildings, transportation, waste, adaptation, and sustainable lifestyles. My project is mainly focused on the adaptation portion, and specifically Adaptation Action 4.3, which is to analyze the climate-related public health impacts in Iowa City. And there was a study done by the USDN organization in 2015, which included historical data and future projections for what Iowa City's weather and climate will look like eventually. So what I tend to say is it's the weather we have now, but just extremes. So extreme heat, extreme cold, extreme winds, and extreme precipitation and flooding, which is sort of the 4 areas that I've began to categorize my project into. And for extreme heat, you get things like heat waves, longer and hotter days. For extreme cold, higher winter temperatures, cold waves, extreme winds, things we have right now, but in more frequency, such as tornadoes, heavy winds, damaging winds, and then extreme precipitation and flooding. So excessive daily rainfall frequency is predicted to increase, and just overall damaging weather events. So my time is what, 15 minutes? Or 30 minutes? Okay.
You can ask your questions.
Okay, so let me just tell you all a little bit about my project pathway and what I started to do versus where it's at right now. So when I initially came, I spent a few weeks trying to understand the climate conversation, getting myself acquainted with climate stuff, with what was already happening in the city, who was working on what are they doing, who's having a seat at the table in climate policy, climate change, climate conversation. And then that was my first step. And then my second step was sort of understanding what the pre-existing socioeconomic barriers were in Iowa City. So what I mean by that are just challenges that people in Iowa City have identified, such as housing, increased rent, transportation or lack thereof, homes without air conditioning, and things like that. And then my third step was trying to connect climate change to public health, using my background in public health. And thereafter, I was trying to understand, well, how do we address climate change using an equity lens, which I'm gonna talk a little bit more about. I did have a visual for you, but I might just have to talk through it because I don't know if you'll be able to see it. So equity is acknowledging the fact that health risks and impacts of climate change are not equally or fairly distributed across everyone in Iowa City, right? And then ensuring everyone's ability to participate in climate action. So for example, with the Climate Action Plan, we have 35 actions, and we want to make sure that everyone can participate in those actions, and that's a huge part of where equity comes into play in climate adaptation, so to speak. And then we want to make sure that everyone can benefit from climate action regardless of their social identity. So that's kind of just like an overview of what I mean when I say that I'm working on equity and climate change. I found a really cool graphic that was made by the CDC that explains the impact of climate change on human health and exacerbation of existing inequities. So the way it's described, it's a little, I guess I can turn it around as well, but I don't know if you'd be able to see it. Just a moment. Or I'll just talk through it. So rising temperatures, we expect to have environmental degradation and extreme heat, and then more extreme weather, degraded living social conditions and social inequities, changes in vector ecology. So here we're talking about vector-borne diseases such as like malaria, dengue, West Nile virus, and certain vector-borne diseases that have already been found in Iowa City and then are predicted to show up in Iowa City because of climate change. And then of course, air pollution and increasing allergens, water quality impacts, water and food supply impacts, and severe weather, which is what I'm mainly focused on. And I've had a really, I would say, not a hard time, but a really interesting challenge with trying to explain why it's so important to address equity and climate change. And so then what I wanted to do was highlight this quote that I found by Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali, and he's the Senior Vice President of Environmental Justice, Climate and Community Revitalization for the National Wildlife Federation. Very long title, but really cool quote. So he says, you can't talk about the impacts of climate change and not talk about frontline communities. So in this case, at-risk communities who for decades have been asking folks to focus on these impacts. And I feel like if anything else, that quote just really outlines why leading with equity is so important in this area. And then going back to my project pathway, so those are some of the things that I've learned about addressing equity and climate action and the importance of it. And then after that, I thought to myself, well, okay, so what can I do with this information? What can Brenda do with this information? What can the city do with this information? And then we arrived to an interesting model of stakeholder mapping that we plan to use for different projects, whether they be sustainability or equity or whatever anyone is working on, and do it in a way that it can be used across different disciplines. So I did provide a photo of this, and I think that I can't really explain this without showing this one, so let me just go ahead and blow this up as much as I can, and then I'll just hold it like this. Oops, just a moment. So for the past 4 or 5 weeks, I've been working really hard on this stakeholder mapping, and I will explain it, but I do want to say some things about it. So originally when I started my project, I had this idea. I was like, yeah, I'm a global health, public health student. I'm gonna come to the city of Iowa City and I'm gonna do this community-based participatory research project, and then we're gonna change Iowa City and change the world. And okay, not really, I wasn't that intense with it, but somewhere deep down, I thought, 12 weeks was enough time to make the strides that I thought I wanted to make, but halfway through I realized, wow, 12 weeks is enough time to barely start thinking of what a project that will address equity and climate change would even look like. And so that's where we're at right now. So the biggest thing that we have, and we think it's really, it's gonna be really useful and important, is the stakeholder mapping. So hopefully people can see it. I'll go over here and then go over here as I'm talking. So what this is it's 4 quadrants. So we have quadrant 1, which is prioritize, quadrant 2, guide, quadrant 3, monitor, and quadrant 4, leverage. And the way these quadrants are organized is on an axis. So the the y-axis is the impact by extreme weather, and then the x-axis is the power and influence in the community. So we want to think about all of the different stakeholders, or another way to think of it is organizations in Iowa City, groups of people in Iowa City, and we want to actually place them on this map. And in the application that we're currently using, it is an interactive map, and different, collaborators from different organizations or different departments in the city will be able to work on it and move around the different stakeholders on the map. It's really difficult for me to explain this. I really wish I had some kind of screen to show this to you because it's really cool. But so this is how it goes. So remember, this is going from low impact by extreme weather to high impact by extreme weather, and then low power and influence in the community to high power and influence in the community. So quadrant 1, prioritize. These groups are highly impacted by extreme weather, but not necessarily have that much power or influence in the community. And so our goal is to prioritize the immediate needs of people that fall into this quadrant, or groups that fall into this quadrant, and then also prioritize their input on climate action, safety, and weather resiliency. So an example of a group that might be inside of this quadrant would be low-income families, people who are experiencing limited English proficiency, immigrant groups. So these groups are the groups we want to prioritize when we start thinking about climate action. And then in quadrant 2, which is guide, these groups are highly impacted by the effects of climate change, but they also have high power and influence in the community. So we want to guide their actions because most likely they're already working on climate stuff. So an example of somebody that might be in this group would be a climate organization or a climate group. And then at the city, we actually have Iowa City groups on this map, but I wasn't able to bring that in today. And in quadrant 3, which is monitor, these are low impact, low influence groups. And the reason why we want to monitor them is because they can be fluid across this stakeholder map. And we want eventually to get them into a group such as prioritize or guide or leverage, which I'm going to talk about later. So someone that might be in the monitor group, quadrant 3, would be someone who just moved to Iowa City, doesn't really have that many stakes in the community, and someone who just is very new to the place and may not necessarily have deep or embedded connections with Iowa City. And then the last group, quadrant 4, is leverage. So groups that we want to leverage are groups that are not as severely impacted by extreme weather, but have very high influence and power in the community. So we want to leverage their power and put climate action on their radar, if it's not already. So an example of somebody that might be in this group would be, I don't know, like a politician or somebody that is a respectful, a community leader that everyone kind of respects, and a community organizer, so to speak. So this is what we're currently using for our stakeholder mapping, and what the plan is to use this as a way to go back and fill in some of the gaps and reach some of the people that we weren't able to reach when we did our first climate survey in last year, and when we put out the climate action plan. Whoops. So just really quickly, because I know there's another presenter, so some of my findings and thoughts as I've been going around and talking to some of the organizations. As I said, I've only been here for 12 weeks, so I've spoken to a lot of the organizations in Iowa City, but nearly not as many as that are on our map. But some of the things I found, overarching concerns are language translations, lack of transportation and housing related issues or challenges. And then the other thing is, so many organizations are already working on climate-related public health issues, and I've realized that what we need to do is essentially transform the perception of what climate action means. So when I say that, what I'm talking about is, for example, I've spoken to organizations and I'm like, hi, so can you tell me a little bit about your organization? What do you do? What are you working on? What's your goal? And then they'll say something like, oh, well, we're working on, I'm just trying to think of something like housing for people experiencing homelessness, right? And they may not see that as something that's a climate issue, but what we want to get out is that it is a climate issue. It's an issue that's dealing with the effects of climate change. So as it gets colder, and when we have extreme cold waves, who's dealing with that? Our population experiencing homeless, how are they able to receive warmth from the cold? How are we going to be able to help them either find housing or warm up or what may have you? So there are lots of issues that we're seeing and already experiencing in Iowa City that are directly connected to climate, and we just need to change the narrative and have stakeholder groups really see how they are already working on climate mitigation, even if they don't know it. And then just building a comprehensive understanding of stakeholder relationships, so the relationships of groups between each other, which would be useful for the city and other organizations to pursue other projects. And then lastly, the need for more collaboration across community stakeholders. This is something that I have seen almost every organization that I've spoken to has said either they didn't know that a certain organization had existed in the community, or if they knew, they had no idea what they were doing or no idea what they were working on. And sometimes we see that in the city as well. There are organizations that could be probably really useful for helping with things that we're working on. But if we don't know that they exist, and we don't know what they're working on, or they don't know what we can help them with, and vice versa, then that's something that becomes a limitation to climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And then lastly, I'm trying to wrap it up because I know that there's another presenter. I'm so sorry. I've been working on so much this summer, it's kind of hard to put it all into a few minutes. But finally, I just put together some next steps. So the plan is to use the stakeholder mapping and some of my findings to pursue the different adaptation actions that I didn't hit. So for example, adaptation action 4.1, which is to conduct an at-risk populations asset mapping. And if you're not sure what that is, what an asset map is, to really understand what are the skills and strengths of neighborhoods or communities in Iowa City, and how we can leverage their skills and strengths to build community resiliency. And then adaptation action 4.2, we will then be able to develop communications and outreach plan for at-risk populations, because now we know who's in the city, who's existing, what they're working on, and where are gaps that need to be filled. And then adaptation action 4.4, which is to coordinate extreme weather preparedness planning with local agencies. And again, it's just doing the stakeholder mapping is something that is going to help with completing the other actions. And it's going to make it, I think, a lot easier to do that. And the last thing is utilizing the stakeholder map for future projects across internal departments. So that's all I have for you today, and hopefully you all get a chance to read the report that we're gonna put out eventually. Well, thank you, and if you have any questions, I guess we can do it all the way at the end.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
If you wouldn't mind.